want to start by reading a little bit from her fabulous book, The Day I Became a Runner, A Women's History of India Through the Lens of Sport. It's one of the finest books I've read in quite a long time. So there's this bit she's written on page 31 among all the beautiful things in the book. My own reaction to the protests and marches in the winter of 2012-13 was an overwhelmingly physical one. She's talking, of course, about Nirbhaya. I wanted to put myself out there on the streets with them. I wanted to occupy space in the world. I wanted to put myself, my body on view. I wanted to tell the world, I exist, so get used to me. So no one would need to ask, but what is she doing? What was she doing there? Even in that moment of intense public anger, I heard that inevitable question rearing its head in conversations within the rallies and without. But what was she doing there? Why was the 23-year-old paramedical student not home by 8 p.m. on a Sunday evening? You wrote this, immediately after Nirbhaya, and now it seems that you may as well have written it after RG Kar. What happened there? It's been 10 years or more, and yet we don't seem to have made any progress. And we can't always wear your running shoes and run away from things. So, Sohini, tell me about what makes your book so relevant even now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kaveri, for reading out, and thank you for all the lovely things you said about it. What makes my book relevant?
Even now, and timeless in a way.
Well, I was actually reading up about, my mind has been very much on Calcutta and RG Kaur, and I was reading up about this case called Phulmoni Devi. So in 1891, the age of consent legislation was passed. Many of you may know this, but so that raised the age of legally sanctioned marriage from 10 to 12. And that had caused an uproar because Orthodox Hindu society, also parts of other communities, felt that. The feeling was, so one of the things that was said was that this is too late. Women will be spoiled, so it'll be like spoiled fruit by the time they 12. Yeah. So I don't know if you're aware of the story of Phulmoni Devi, but she was 11 years and some months when she died soon after she was married, soon after her wedding night. And it was, the autopsy concluded that it was death due to rape because she was not able to, she had not reached puberty. So that was the case that established the British government had been trying to say for a long time that there is a problem with underage marriage, but that was the case that established death due to rape. So I was actually thinking that 1890, so this happened in 1889, and then it took a couple of years for that legislation to be passed from 10 to 12. So I was actually thinking that more than 130 years have passed since then, and we don't seem to have, and the reason I bring it up was because, again, the truth of what a woman goes through, even in the RG Kaur case, and that I was thinking that especially because there is this sentiment that Bengalis are especially progressive when it comes to treatment of women or their attitude. So I was just thinking that this focus on what happens to women and how much it's rooted in the truth of the body, the autoptic truth. Even in I've been watching the Supreme Court proceedings, and so there's a lot of focus on the autopsy, the forensic report, and the truth of the matter being established because on the basis of what the forensics say. So, of course, I'm a believer in facts, and facts are an important, it's an important way to establish truth. But I don't know, I feel a little uncomfortable with women's experience being reduced to what, to the truth of broken bodies and how broken it is, and I have
And
no
the graphic and the graphic description thereof,
yeah. So
which
even
is
in,
almost exploitative.
yeah. So I feel like I'm not sure if the same reaction would have. Of course, the class and caste statement is true. I think Arundhati Roy had said it for Jyoti Singh in 2012, 2013. It's true. If this woman was not a doctor, we would not have had this kind
So
of a
much
reaction.
focus,
But also there's something to do with the degree of violence that has been inflicted. So anyway, it's a long route to say that that legislation, so the historian Tanika Sarkar says there were 3 moments in establishing the personhood of women. One was 3 legal moments. 1829 was Sati, when Sati was abolished. Then 1856, when widow remarriage was permitted. And then 1891. These 3 moments which established in her, one could say citizenship, I would say that women too are persons. And then my argument is the reason why I decided to, if we could just have the book
The
cover.
book cover, please. Can we have the PPT?
Yeah.
Thank you.
The reason why I call it a women's history of India through the lens of sport, I don't know how visible the central line is. It says a women's history of India through the lens of sport. The reason what I'm trying to do is that I'm trying to map a history of women's citizenship. And why through sport? Because I think sports gives women the legitimacy to cross the threshold between the private sphere of the home and the public sphere of the world outside. I call this the Lakshman Rekha of citizenship, which we have in South Asia. That, I mean, it probably existed 150 years ago in the rest of the world as well, but it's very marked even today that women are revered as mothers, as sisters, wives, but the moment we step out of the precincts of the home, our status as equal citizens is, well, it's a lot less certain.
Right. Whereas sport gives them
Because it's seen as nationalistic.
Yes.
Because it's
and
seen
it's
as
performative nationalism. They're doing something.
Yeah, because it's seen as inherently something for the nation.
nation.
It's something, it's seen as a, and I mean, there is I draw a historical connection between nationalism.
Yeah.
The high noon of nationalism is the turn of the 20th century, which is also the time we see organized sport coming into being. Organized sport.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about ancient sport, or
Right.
sport has of course existed.
Yeah.
In medieval India, Central Asia, we had wrestling. But 1896, if one had to put a date to it, is the first edition of the modern Olympics.
Yes.
Then there's several other dates, but they all, 1904, FIFA, the World Football Association is set up. 1912 or 13, I think the International Tennis Federation sets up its rules. So what we see is that as momentum is building for World War I, which is 1914, we already see nations lining up against one another on the sports field.
Yeah.
So those two are, and I think George Orwell said this, right? That sport is war minus the shooting. And he said this at the height of the Cold War, when a Soviet football team was visiting England. So the second part, the first part of the argument is that sport and nationalism are inherently related. So men obviously perform nationalism when they go to war. How do women perform nationalism? Because unless we are in the unfortunate situation of living in Gaza, we are not in a perpetual state of war. So historically, we see the suffragists, and they establish, they get major, most people would know this, but just in case somebody doesn't, the suffragist movement is the movement that lobbied to get women the vote. Major gains in 1918 and 19 in the UK and the US, because it's the end of the Second World War. If I could just request maybe slide 4 or 5 on the presentation.
Yeah.
So
I want to,
Actually,
after that, I want to take you back to Mary. Yes.
yeah, okay, I'll come
Yeah,
back to Mary.
yeah.
But I just wanted to show why the suffragists. So this is a poster. The poster on the right is a poster that I got from the US Library of Congress. The US Library of Congress website has lots of posters like this. This is a World War I poster. It's obvious, I don't really have to explain. But look at it. This is basically an ad for stenographers. But look at the iconography.
imagery.
Yeah, so that you are going to be a stenographer.
But
Which,
you're in a way fighting.
I don't know if, should I explain what stenography is? Because
No,
not a few
I think
people no
they
longer
must be
know.
knowing. That much I think.
So you're taking the place of somebody who is serving at war. So very much a performance of nationalism. And that's why in 1918, 1919, we see women getting the vote after World War I, where they were seen as having done their duty.
Right. So I want to take you back to one of the iconic women you profile here, who's Mary D'Souza, who sort of was a track and field athlete as well as a hockey player, which is so unusual, and how she sort of stumbled into all the way to the Olympics, quite amazing. So talk a little about her, and I love the way you contrast her with your grandmother as well. Whom you call Deepti throughout. And I'm thinking, nice way to refer to your grandmother. But two very different experiences around the same time. And you say that when they were in Bombay, they may have even met at Churchgate station, which is so interesting. And one goes all the way to the Olympics, and one sort of circumscribes herself, right? She chooses to do that. And chooses to do that for her daughter as well, which I thought was, there's something very moving about that. So talk a little about her, Mary and Deepti.
So this is Mary. She's what is known as a double international. I specifically chose a picture of her with the hockey stick. Double international because she played hockey and ran track for India. She actually played hockey for much longer, till the 60s. This large horizontal photograph, if I could just request the gentleman to... this large photograph, the horizontal photograph is the Indian contingent marching in the opening ceremony of the 1952 Helsinki Olympics. The 1952 Games is the first time that India sent women to the Olympics. And so if you just focus on the center of the horizontal photograph, you'll see...
One woman there.
Actually 3 or 4.
Yeah.
So there were 4 women. They are dressed in what looks like salwar kurtas and the, what was known as a Jawahar coat. So those are the 4 Indian women, Mary D'Souza, Dolly Nazir, Nilima Ghosh and Aarti Saha. 2 track athletes and 2 swimmers. And that... India is not a typo, that's apparently how the Finns spell India. India. Yeah, so Mary was a double international and she had already won. India actually hosted the first Asian Games in 1951. The 1982 Games is really well known, but the inaugural one was hosted in New Delhi in 1950. She had won bronze in the 200 meters, if I'm not mistaken. And in 1952, when women were sent from India for the first time, she was part of the team. And she was very surprised herself to make it to the team. I was living with my grandmother when I was interviewing her over Skype. This is in 2015. And one day my grandmother asked me, who is this person you are speaking with on Tuesday night? So I told her this person, she grew up in Bombay. At the time, she was 82, and my grandmother was just a couple of years younger. And my grandmother said, oh, she grew up very much around, because my grandmother's a Bombay girl. She grew up in Bombay. And then it struck me that the two of them were growing up in the 1930s at the same time, and within a radius. So in my mind, I could see this 8 forming, because my grandmother used to live in a place called near Bombay Central, and she used to stay in Bandra, and that's not that far away. And they could easily have, crossed paths. They would have crossed paths, I think. So it gave me an interesting narrative structure for my book, I think. I call it a gift from my grandmother, which is that I am tracing the history of the women's history of India, independent India, through a public thread, the relatively public thread of these athletes, not so well known, except Usha and maybe Duti Chand.
And Kamaljeet Sandhu to a certain extent.
Yeah?
For people of a certain generation.
Yeah. And I thought that I also have a private thread of history through my grandmother, my mother, and me, which is something that novelists often do, right? They trace the story of post-colonial nations through the life of a family. So
Suitable boy.
so many others,
Yeah.
right? I think Anita Desai
yeah,
and
all of
so
them.
many. So I think Chitrita Banerjee has one novel called Independence, which is 2 sisters.
Which is beautiful. It's
Yeah.
set in Calcutta.
Yeah, so I thought this is something that, that was an experiment that I tried. And the idea came from my grandmother mentioning this. But it allowed me to see what choices, what kind of lives women have if they took this. I mean, Mary took a chance. She was a good hockey player. She was a good athlete, but she was nowhere near the best. But just the fact that she took a chance allowed her to trace a very different life from my grandmother, who was in every way possibly more privileged than her in terms of her education, in terms of her family background. So that was an interesting contrast, I felt.
Right. And I think repeatedly this comes up, when you talk about P.T. Usha, Kamaljeet Sandhu, all these women had to make that choice, and then work really hard for it. And one of the things that strikes me when you talk especially about Kamaljeet Sandhu, and we'll come to that if we have a slide, is that she felt so disappointed in herself. That here was an Asian Games gold medalist and a big star, and she got to the Olympics as well. But she was so disappointed in herself, that she didn't take the next step, the next chance to go further. So talk a little about that. How does it work for an athlete who spent years and years and years working so hard, for that dream, that ambition, and then you don't succeed? What does it do to you psychologically?
Kamaljeet Sandhu, first Indian woman to win an individual gold outside India, 1970 Asian Games in Bangkok, and she defeats a Olympic medalist. Chi Cheng. So she defeats an Olympic medalist in winning 400 meters. India is particularly good at the 400 meters. Usha is also a 400 meters run.
Why is that, by the way?
I think something about middle distance. I think so. Middle distance technically would be 800 meters to 5,000, but India does tend to do well in 800 meters, even 400 meters. Not so well in like the 100 meters and 200 meters. Those are like Those are the most prestigious track events, and we don't see. I think it's got to do with training and. But anyway, so Kamaljeet, big star in the 70s. But Kamaljeet, I would say I think Kamaljeet herself would admit that there's a big difference between her and Usha. Usha really was an outlier. I mean, whatever our feelings towards her, and most people have mixed feelings after 2023 and 2024, but she was an outstanding athlete, and she was very different from today's athletes in the sense that she was at that time she had to be a real workhorse. So she would do 100 meters, 200 meters, 400 meters, 400-meter hurdles, relays. So she would do as many as 6 races. Today, athletes are they're not burdened with as much.
And I like the fact that despite everything, when she comes back and tries to train again, PT, I'm talking about PT Usha, I love the way you, in conversation she's telling you, I was a beggar, it would seem, the way the press wrote about me. At 28, I was a veteran, and you put it in quotes. I looked up the dictionary for the meaning. Veteran means a retired person or an old person. If you have a baby, you should retire, it seems. I can just imagine her saying this. And then you say that it means someone with a lot of experience. And she says, I know what it means. And I know how they meant it. I should cook food and wear a sari and pose with my son and husband on festival days. Then they will put pictures of me in the papers, but I'm not here. I'm not there for your photos. I'm there for myself. It's one of the finest lines in this. I think I'm not there for your photos, I'm there for myself. It shows that single-minded dedication and, this complete obsession that you need to have if you want to get even to the 4th position in the Olympics.
You're absolutely right. But just to complete what you were saying about Kamaljeet so Kamaljeet becomes one of the first athletes from India to go and train in the US, which she got that opportunity because she defeated an Olympic medalist. But she found that there wasn't much attention that was given to. You had to be, have a coach of your own who's interested in you. And she really realized the difference between the first world and the third world. And I think she's very self-aware. And it's interesting that in the middle of yet another Palestine-Israel war, but the 1972 Olympics,
Games,
so those are the ones. She was there. She was there for the Munich Games, and the Indian sports establishment sadly has a way of diminishing sports people. And we've seen this in multiple movies.
We've seen it most recently in Vinesh Phogat.
Yeah, and so many other, the entire wrestlers part. It has a way of diminishing. And so Kamaljeet was already defeated by that. What I like about Kamaljeet is that she's very aware of her limitations as a sports person. But she's also, there's no doubt that she was one of the best in India, and the government let her down. It's humiliating to have to ask and to reach out through channels of networks of people you know.
Networks, rather than
it's a humiliation. So that coupled with what I had to remember, what I really had to. I grew up in an age of television, but it was a shock. It was quite a traumatic thing to witness what happened in the Munich Games. I'm guessing most people will know what happened in Munich. So there was the Israeli Olympic team was kidnapped in the middle of the Munich Olympic Games by Palestinian liberation fighters or terrorists or whatever is the word
you want to call them.
Yeah, and there was a drama, and that was the first, and Kamaljeet and others witnessed it. those who were in the Olympic Village, they witnessed it. And this was not the age of internet and television, so they were not aware of what it means to see people in masks. And so it was,
balaclava masks,
yeah. So it was quite a trauma, and it added to that sense of humiliation that she was already feeling. She was also in the US before that training, already feeling very aware of her shortcomings as an athlete compared to the American athletes. So that's Kamaljeet's story. You, what did you ask me about Usha? Oh, you said that.
When she comes back to as a mother, which is interesting because now we have a lot of mothers who are, from Serena Williams to Mary Kom, who actually have returned.
I did a lot of my research for this book. I would say 70 to 75% of my research for this book is actually newspaper archives. And the rest would be, I spent about 7 to 10 days, sometimes 2 weeks with each athlete. But when I went to meet any athlete, and this is a method I hit upon when I was interviewing Mary, because she was already 80 plus when I interviewed. She was very sharp, but the events were 60 years ago. So I realized it makes sense to do as much research as possible before I meet them. And the newspaper is a very good way to. So I spent a lot of time in the newspaper room of the National Library in Kolkata. And with P.T. Usha, the interesting thing, why I bring this up, is in the 90s, you really see, headlines like "Pathetic Show by Usha."
Right.
And really, she was almost on a weekly basis. She was not the Usha she was in the 80s. She was not that athlete anymore. But it was very humiliating. I mean, today, I wouldn't have expected, if I hadn't gone back to the newspaper room, that those were the kind of
headlines about her,
that was the kind of news writing about her. But what I like about her is that she has a love for sport that transcends all of these things. Like she, of course, she was annoyed by this coverage, but as she says, like, her focus was that she wanted to do what she wanted. She wanted to have another last try and see. She has this huge showcase of medals in her home in Paioli. It's very difficult to. I tried at various times.
And the street is named after her, right? On which the home is.
You may be right. I forget, but. It's very difficult to, you have to pan your camera to get
see the number of
And when I was doing that, she tells me, why I have this. So I was like, or maybe I didn't respond. I was trying to respond, and she says, it's all because I didn't get that one medal at the 84 Olympics. If I had that,
I
wouldn't need this.
Amazing.
What I like about her is that she was so committed. She loved sport, and she believed that she had a chance to win a medal. And that's what I really like about her, that she didn't care about... She did care, but her love for sport transcended that.
When you look at the wrestlers now and what happened to them, of course they're not part of the story, part of this, but I mean, it's the same, isn't it? So many years of hard work, and then, at the last minute, a few grams between you and the medal. I cannot even wrap my head around how heartbreaking it must be. What do you think when you look at something like that, look at headlines like that?
I would look at Vinesh's incredibly sad defeat in the light of the wrestlers' protest, because the events of last year led to her opting for this particular weight category, right? Because she's ideally best suited for the 53. 52 or 53, not the 50 kg cap. But she missed one competition because she had a surgery. And I think, she's a Commonwealth Games medalist. Of course, Antim Pangal, who got that spot for India in the 53, she also got it fairly. But I think I think at sports, people are always told that they owe the nation, but I feel that the nation also owes you.
Yeah.
I feel Vinesh was owed, and she was due to be. I mean, she had every right to be considered for a 53 kg spot.
Yeah.
So I would look at that not in terms of the Olympic rules. I know the bell has gone, but I just want to take a minute to
We
say
have
that.
3 minutes now.
Okay. I just want to take a minute to say that I know the views on this are divided, and a lot of people feel that the Olympic rules are unfair and that women's bodies, women's bodies do swell, and I mean, there is water retention, there is all those. But my point is, but all those things are there for all the women
Everyone, yeah.
contenders. So I'm one of those who actually feels that the rules are there, made well in advance, and the rules are the rules. The real tragedy is that Vinesh was not given a spot in the 53 kg category, which is what I feel. I feel the nation also owes her.
Right, absolutely. And just a couple of last questions. I think the difference between an individual athlete and as a member of a team, is there a difference when it comes to this idea of performative nationalism? Is that solitary runner seen as much of a nationalist, let's say, as when you're a member of a team sport, like hockey or cricket or whatever? Is there a difference?
So the reason I chose running was, my reasoning was that it is the most minimal sport in terms of everything, in terms of equipment. Until about 5 years ago, you didn't even need to wear shoes on the track. Now the Athletics Federation has changed that. You don't need a team.
Yeah.
So there was a reason why I chose running and not sports in general. Also, it makes it more systematic. The solitary runner versus my argument is just the using the body to perform sport is itself seen as something worthwhile.
Something that you can step out of the home for.
Yeah. I mean, towards the end of the book, I draw a comparison with something else, with cinema, which was also born at the turn of the 20th century. And the word that is used for, the verb that is used for actors, singers, dancers is also perform. And both, to my mind, there is a similarity between sports and other performances in the sense that they're bodily labors, whether it's singing or dancing or acting, and it is performed for an audience. But those performers are seen as very different. In fact, after the Tokyo 2021 actually, there was a meme. I don't know if you saw it, but there was a meme which showed, so there was a picture of Kareena Kapoor smoking, which was possibly from one of her films, possibly Heroine. And there was a picture of Sindhu, who had just won her second consecutive medal. And she was posing with a pan on her head, and the meme said, "Our heroine, your heroine." So that drew that distinction between the two kinds of performing bodies. So one kind of body is seen as performing for the nation, Sindhu, and the other kind of body is seen as performing for titillation, not performing to...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which brings me to my last question. Are you a Suraj Barjatia heroine, or are you a Satyajit Ray heroine who's always shot brooding and, as you describe, and Suraj Barjatia heroine who's seen as a little chirpy little thing who's running around? So what are you?
I think, I would... Definitely, I think Suraj, I would like to be seen as a Suraj Barjatia heroine, but I don't think anybody would. I don't think I have the requisite, I don't fit the bill for that. But actually, Ray's heroines, they are very, very interesting, but I spent much of last year watching Mrinal Sen films, and I feel like, there's Ray's vision of women, while progressive, liberal, and beautifully layered, is very Brahmo.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
they will ultimately not do the morally. So Ray, for instance, has qualms about, or he's queasy about anything which is seen as prostitution.
Oh,
Or
yes, of course.
so that is not. But
Yeah.
Mrinal doesn't have
Yeah.
that. Mrinal's there's a lovely film called Calcutta 71 where Madhabi, who's also a Ray heroine,
of course.
tells her mother that, don't you know, so this is very much a film in the aftermath, the story is set in the aftermath of the 1943 famine. And she's saying, don't you know why
Right.
I made the choices that I did? So I don't think I
Maybe
want
a
to be,
Mrinal set.
I don't want to be a Ray heroine, I think, although he does shoot women
Yeah.
very beautifully.
Great. Thank you so much. I think it was a wonderful, instructive session. And it really tells you about Sohini's mind. It goes from cinema to sport to her own personal experiences. It's a wonderful book. I really do recommend it to all of you. And
Thank you,
so
Kaveri.
much.